Hi there. Sorry that we're starting just a little bit late this evening. We had a few technical glitches, but they're all fixed now. And I couldn't be more excited. My name's Daphne Rabinovich, and on behalf of the Giller Foundation, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's book club. Please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible experience. And it is my profound pleasure to introduce you to our interviewer tonight, Jill Adamson. It's actually the second time Jill's been on our Zoom, or third. I think twice as an interviewer and once as an interviewee, if I'm not mistaken. And she is the critically acclaimed author of Ridgerunner, which was shortlisted for the 2020 Scotiabank Giller Prize and won the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize, as well as the Outlander, which won the Dashiell Hammett Prize for Literary Excellence in Crime Writing, the Amazon.ca First Novel Award, the Relit Award, and the Drummer General's Award. It was a finalist for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, CBC Canada Reads, and the Prix Féminin Award in France, was longlisted for the International IMPAC Impact Dublin Literary Award and chosen as a Globe and Mail and Washington Post Top 100 book. She's also the author of a collection of linked stories, Help Me, Jacques Cousteau, and two poetry collections, Primitive and Ashland. She lives in Toronto, and she has forewarned me that her cat may appear on screen with us tonight, so that's okay. So tonight, Jill will be interviewing Brian Thomas Isaac, author of the 2022 longlisted and wonderful novel, All of the Quiet Places. We're also really, really lucky here at the Giller because he is one of our jury members this year. So I don't want to waste any more of your time. It's already 7:10. Please join me in welcoming both Jill and Brian.
Thanks, Daphne Rabinovich and the Giller Book Club. Thanks for inviting me to do this. It's a great pleasure. Emma Truax, digital manager and Zoom wrangler, got us working together. Now we're all on the screen. It was a bit of a hairy furball there, but we're here. So it is my pleasure to talk to Brian today about his incredible book. I'm going to read his bio so that you know kind of who he is. And then I'm going to read from the jacket, as you would in a bookstore when you're picking up a book and trying to figure out what this particular novel is about. So Brian Thomas Isaac was born in 1950 on the Okanagan Indian Reserve near Vernon, BC. After completing grade 8, he found work in the oil fields and in construction and eventually retired as a bricklayer. At the age of 50, without any formal training, he began to write, and 17 years later, he completed his first novel, All the Quiet Places. His best-selling debut won the 2022 Indigenous Voices Award, was a finalist for the Governor General's Award and the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, and was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and CBC's Canada Reads. Brian and his wife live in West Kelowna, where he enjoys time with his 3 grandchildren. In addition to being a member of the 2023 Scotiabank Giller Prize panel, he is also completing his second novel. I'll show you the book. You've probably already seen a screenshot. It's a beautiful cover. It's 1956, and 6-year-old Eddie Toma lives with his mother, Grace, and his little brother, Louis, on the far edge of the Okanagan Indian Reserve in British Columbia's southern interior. Eddie's mother is determined to have him learn the ways of the white world by sending him to school in the small community of Falkland, while she challenges the Indian agent and writes futile letters to Ottawa to protest the sparse resources in their community. His father returns to the family after years away, only to bring chaos and instability. Old friends Isabel and Ray join them in an overcrowded house. Through the turbulent, unpredictable years of his childhood and adolescence, it is Only when he is in his grandmother's company that Eddie finds solace and true companionship. All the Quiet Places is a story of what can happen when every adult in a person's life has been affected by colonialism. Through Eddie's unsentimental, unguarded witness, it tells of the acute separation from culture that can occur even at home in a loved, familiar landscape. So that'll give you the basic plot. I thought, we talked about this earlier, I thought perhaps it would be great to have Brian read from a part of his book that he thinks will give you a sense of what the prose is like and what his wonderful main character is like.
Hi.
Hi there,
Hi
Brian.
there. Should I start now?
Yeah, give us
Okay,
a read.
First thing I want to say is that on Eddie's first day of school, the reader gets to witness his journey across his first steps across the bridge that joins the two cultures. On one side is the reserve, the other side is what's called the white man's land. So, okay. After his face was scrubbed and a wet comb was pulled through his hair, Eddie stood in the middle of the kitchen in his new clothes. Grace told him to turn around and study him a moment. She had one hand on her hip, the other under her chin. Wait, she said. Go around again. Hold it. She pulled the price tag off the back pocket of his brown corduroys. Then she unsnapped his pants and pulled up the shirt tail caught in the tie. After zipping him up and closing the snap, she held his face in her hands and looked him in the eye. Now listen to me and listen real good. When you get to the bridge, make sure there's no cars coming before you go across. When the coast is clear, you run as fast as you can. You hear? You already told me, Mom. Well, I'm telling you again, just don't fool around. That bridge is too long for anybody to get across without damn near getting killed. Don't go daydreaming. She handed Eddie a brown shopping bag. I didn't know if you were supposed to take anything with you or not, so I put your coloring book and crayons in there. So make sure you look after them, all right? Eddie nodded. She held up a sandwich loosely wrapped in wax paper and shook it at him. A piece of crust fell to the floor. Here's your lunch. You make sure you eat it all and don't go wasting it. She placed the sandwich inside a yellow lard pail. Look at that, eh? Perfect lunch kit for your first day of school. Funny how it ended up in the garbage pit. Know how it got there? Eddie shook his head. After adding a piece of white cake, she snapped the lid shut, and Eddie tried not to show his disappointment that the pail had made its way back into the house again. He should have taken it way out in the bush. I know you wanted the new one with cowboys shooting at a stagecoach, but we're not rich. We're not millionaires. You think money grows on trees, huh? Do you? Eddie shrugged his shoulders. You better get going. You don't want to miss the school bus on the first day. His little brother Louis gawked at Eddie. His finger was shoved in his nose up to the first knuckle. Are you coming with me, Mom? What, you want me to take you to the bus and have the other kids laugh at you? No, you got to move on. And if you don't know what to do, just watch what everybody else is doing. The Clough kids will be there anyway. Ask one of them. And don't you be scared neither. You get right in there and don't let anybody push you around. Stick up for yourself. If anybody gets funny with you, just punch them on the nose. Grace opened the door. Placing her hand on Eddie's back, she nudged him outside to begin his first day of school. When the door closed, he heard muffled voices on the other side and wanted to be let back in. Now he knew how the cat felt after it was put outside for the night. He crawled through the page wire fence and slid down the bank to the pavement. Stopping at the bridge, he looked across the 100-foot distance to the other side. He looked in both directions, and we saw the coast was clear, began to run. Halfway across, he glanced down to the river and saw the tail of an animal slip into the water. He stopped and stuck his head through the railing and watched an otter swimming close to shore. It looked up at Eddie before ducking under the logs jammed against the bank. The noise of the river was loud, but the sound of a loud motor made him stop and look up the highway. A tanker truck towing a long trailer had rounded the bend. Eddie knew that if he tried to run, he wouldn't have enough time to make it across. So he held the shopping bag and lunch pail in his left hand and grabbed the bridge railing with the other to brace himself. He spotted a car coming from the opposite direction. Both would meet right where he was standing. The truck driver blasted his air horn. Eddie stepped up onto the bottom rail and squeezed his eyes shut as a wall of wind pushed him up against the railing. The shopping bag was ripped out of his hands and the coloring book flipped end over end in the air and landed in the river below. Eddie watched helplessly as it floated away. There was a flash of white paper just before the book sank into the darkness. After the truck had gone by, he saw crayons rolling in circles on the pavement. Eddie wanted to pick up as many crayons as he could, but another car came along and finished off the rest. Most of them had been squashed, and they bled purple, green, and yellow. The colors were in even layers, but the red crayons seemed to cover the rest. It looked like blood. Eddie couldn't look away. A loud car horn brought him back to attention. He wiped a tear from his face, switched the wire handle of his lunch pail to his other hand, and ran toward the bus stop. Thank you.
Thanks. That was amazing. And it's a really good choice for that reading to not only show what the language is like, but also it's a beautiful combination of the difficulties of Eddie's life and the natural world and how attuned he is to it and how much a part of the world he is. I have some questions. Let's while we're at this, let's thank your wife Marlene for encouraging you and pushing you to finish this book. You know,
Yeah, she's been a great fan. She's been great. And tonight, getting on the Zoom, I could never have done that in a million years.
she was, yeah, she's your tech expert.
He really is.
That's very
But
cool.
before I start, can I say something here about that last reading?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. When Eddie journeyed across that bridge, he stopped right in the middle. And you know, that's where the tug of war began. Right in the middle of that bridge. On one hand is the world that he knows, and he feels safe and protected out in the outdoors. But on the other hand is the white world, the world he knows nothing about and he wasn't prepared for, and it's waiting for him. So.
And that bridge actually plays a significant role many times in the book, and it's almost a character in itself. It has
You're right.
Your anxiety level goes up when you're dealing with that bridge.
The funny thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The funny thing about that is my mother had been writing letters to Ottawa, to the Department of Indian Affairs, to get the bridge fixed so she could put on a walking lane for the kids to go to school, right? And I'm 72 years old, and 3 years ago, a walking lane was added to the bridge. So, little late.
Little late. Oh my God, that's it's insulting. It is kind of amazing, the mother in this book and the how ferocious she is and how, you know, forceful she is. You can see that in the dialogue at the beginning. She's very firm with the kid, and you see her interacting with the agent from Indian Affairs and how in his face she is, and how, you know, overfaced she also is by the situation. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, what it was like for you to write that stuff, knowing what you do and remembering what your mother went through?
Well, it was pretty easy to write about it because, you know, I used a lot of stuff for my own life, but she was very tough, and my grandmother was very tough. I mean, and so to write about it wasn't really that hard. I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but all the things we waited for, all the things we hoped to get from Indian Affairs, it's like pulling teeth pretty well. And no matter how much she she complained. She actually wrote so many letters to Ottawa that the Indian agent told her to stop because his bosses were giving him hell, and we didn't want to do anything. So it was kind of nice to get that off my chest. Some of the things that I wrote about.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And did you ever feel we had a discussion like this with other writers about what the difficulties of writing about actual people in your actual family and turning it into fiction? I mean, this is not there's biographical elements in this book, but this isn't a biography, it's art. It's a storytelling that just happens to be in the fictional form in a book. But there's so many writers who write about damage and trauma and difficulties in their life, and they have to include real people. And I know that a lot of writers suffer when they tell the truth. Some don't, some just let her rip, like just you're going to get it, and that's that. But there's always a point at which the writer goes, am I comfortable doing this? Is what I'm doing right or wrong? Would the people I'm writing about agree with this? And I have the same thing. My book of short stories is my family. And I was very lucky because the way I wrote it, none of them recognized themselves. I was mostly afraid of my mother, but she just seemed happy with
Are
it.
we all?
Yeah. What were your feelings about using not just your biography, but other people? How did that feel?
Well, first of all, I'm lucky because I'm 72 now and they're all dead. But but I'll tell you what, when I wrote this book, it was it was so good for me because I had kept a lot of stuff inside me as well. And
yeah,
boy, a lot of blood, sweat, and a lot of tears went into writing this book. And it was so good for me, soothing. I felt so much better, and it came off my chest. And I really didn't, like, I kind of hid certain people, certain things, but my uncle Alphonse, he's like all my uncles put together. I had pretty good uncles. Not one of them ever hit me. And they were funny, and they read a lot. They read Zane Grey Westerns and stuff, and they handed them to me whenever they were done. But they played jokes like that, and they were so funny, and they were a lot of fun to be around. And then they all moved away. So yeah, and as far as the school, the characters in the school, I don't think anybody would recognize anybody in there, and they're more of 3 or 4 characters molded into one sort of thing. Like when I was in school, I did get into a lot of trouble, a lot of fights, and I just rounded them all up and made one person. So
right, yeah.
it was easy that way.
It's a funny thing because I was one of the people I heard, it was a panel, and they were talking about writing family, and Neil Smith was his name, and he said the same thing. He wrote the book once everyone was dead, but he also said, and I did this too, and clearly you have too, you change them and morph them so that they don't look like the exact person, and quite often people don't recognize themselves. If I split my grandfather into 2 people, and you can you can play around with it, and it allows you to actually talk about it and actually, as you say, get it off your chest. And
Yes.
I love the idea that it was soothing for you to let
Yes,
it out.
it really was. It really was. The only person who I didn't change in the book was my grandma. She stayed the same. She was
She's a
exactly like that.
great character. She's a great character, and you
Yes.
enjoy being with her. And yeah, no, she's a wonder, actually. And also, as you say, you the sort of positive male figures in your life. It's some people have none, and
Yes.
happen to have had a good dad, and so I can imagine a good dad. I can play with those kinds of things in my writing because I don't have to actually imagine my way to it. But yeah, and then, as you say, they move away. And
Yes.
this is the thing about the book. This is the thing about All the Quiet Places and, you know, what Eddie is going through is that children in this book and in reality are left, they're very affected by the decisions that adults make around them. They can't really leave the house. They're too young. You know, as I often say, some children are so young, they can't even open a door. So, you know, the idea of choice, and they're within the blast radius of whatever damage has been happening to the generation above. And it's very powerfully put in your book. And you really have this sense of, you know, being your entire life circumscribed by someone else's decisions. And
Yes.
that's why it's so beautiful when Eddie gets out and, you know, goes to the river and, you know, is out there by himself in the quiet places. It's palpably wonderful for the reader.
Well, that's good. You know, children, writing children as characters, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, and you know, they're so innocent. And when you see the world through their eyes, they're untainted by the adults around them so far. And they have no opinions and no prejudices. All they want to do is have fun and enjoy the wonderful stuff outside. You know, I was telling my wife that a grown-up goes to the river to get a bucket of water and go home. And he passes by that same rock every single day, twice, 3 times a day, whatever. And he just doesn't enjoy it because it's repetitive and it's more like a chore. Well, it is a chore. But to a child, you see that rock, but you look on the other side of the path and there's other stuff, and there's animals, and there's noise, and there's birds, and there's river, and wind through the trees. It's just a beautiful place to be when you're a child. I do. Someone said, "Boy, you remember a lot when you're really young." I said, "Well, maybe I'm childish after all." I don't know.
A kid at heart. No,
The kid at heart.
that's
I think
something I
so.
was going to ask you if it was, you know, both of us have written boy children, and I have never been a boy. So it was a bit of a balancing act for me to do it, and I had to proceed with a lot of caution. But it was also like pulling things out of my memory as to what it felt like to be young. And the more longer I did it, the better I got at remembering those things. And you have a completely different view of the world. Like Eddie is a very merry little soul. He's as you say, he's no judgments. He's up for it. And you know, it is fun writing a child because, as you say, they don't have the damage yet. You
That's
know,
right.
it's coming, but
That's true.
you know, yeah,
Well, I had I had 2 older brothers and 4 younger ones, and the 2 older brothers kind of left, and then my mom would go to town on a Saturday and just leave me in charge of the kids, and I was pretty young, and so I got to know them really better than I think some people get to know the younger brothers and stuff. I got to anticipate their moods before they started crying, because you had to, right?
yeah.
You had to look after them. You had to be responsible for them at way much too early of an age. So that's, in my way, how I did it. Was I was so familiar with it because I was really involved in it.
So you were able to access, yeah, that's a lot of
Yes,
boys.
yeah, it
That's
is.
a house full of boys, and yeah, and left in major responsibility. You have to grow up, and you have to understand. You can't just drift off. So
Yeah,
yeah, so you had access to that as well. You could put, you know, your kid brothers into the character as well.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought you did a really good job because uh, the young boy, you know, I could really identify with that. So you did a really good job with
Oh,
that.
I'm glad you said that, because yes, of course you worry that you got it completely wrong. And and I have no access to that. The only thing I could do was and I tried to make all my characters, I tried to pack as much as like of me into them.
Right.
And I think I think a lot of writers do that. And the characters probably work better if, you know, you've got a certain amount of self-sympathy for them, because, you know, they're in you. How much of the mother character do you think, how much of you is in there? Did you put any of yourself into her? Because she's really quite, she's quite a phenomenon.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't. There's a lot of me in there, and a lot of the experiences. One more thing before we move on, I want to tell you about this. That you wrote that you were a boy, and you wrote that about a boy in your novel, and I think that's hard to do. I think for a woman to write about a little boy, it's really takes a lot of research and remembering and stuff. But I read a book years ago by Carol Shields. It was called Larry's Party. And at the end of the book, and I always enjoyed her writing. I always enjoyed her writing. I just thought that the character fell a bit short because, first off, he never got turned on by a woman walking away from him. You know? That's the first thing I noticed.
There's something wrong there.
Yeah, and yeah, that's right. Didn't get into a fight, didn't get drunk or something. I don't know.
Oh,
But,
that is so funny. You know, actually, yeah. What was I gonna say? I was gonna talk about a child. Oh fuck, I've lost it. It was
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
no, that was I'm glad that I got away with it, because I know what I was gonna say. How do you research what it's like to be a boy, and especially a 13-year-old boy? We're getting into some interesting territory there. So I asked all of the male friends I have and other writers what they remembered about being that age, and it was amazing. They all just sort of went, I don't know. Nah. I think I maybe didn't like math in school, and I was just like, no, like physically, what was it like? Do you remember caring about your parents at all? What was it like? And I realized, you know, if you asked a woman what being 13 was like, there'd be a long discussion. They would remember a lot, you know, because it's a big time for kids. But I found that hilarious, because it was like, guys, you're not helping me here.
Well, I think you know, for me, writing about young kids and stuff, I think there was a bit of trauma there, being abandoned to care for these little guys, and I think I always remembered that.
Yeah.
I can never forget that.
No,
And
it's
occasionally once I'll say to him, "I looked after you, no, be quiet," you know.
yeah. And
They're
also
50,
to be
60.
that young and to be responsible when, you know, it depends on the kids, but some of them are hard to control even for their own good. Like you can have little hellcats running around.
Yes,
What if something bad happens? You know, it's terrifying. The whole thing is terrifying. So
it is terrifying. It's funny about one of the kids climbed up in the attic, and we just had gyprock ceilings, and he fell right through the gyprock. Talk about making a mess. And I had to answer for that. So,
yeah, because it was you who fell through the roof, right?
well, no, it was me. It was my little brother. But I
No,
should have been.
like,
He should have been climbing that ladder. It was dangerous.
I guess, but yeah, these are the kinds of things when I think of the number of times that I could have been smushed or crushed or kicked by a horse, or, you know, like, speaking of, you have had an interesting past. So we're talking about your family,
Yep.
and you know, using biography, but also you've been writing for a long time, but you came to publication a little later. And I wanted to ask you if you thought, because you seem really quite grounded to me and not particularly terrified by any of this, and very articulate about, you know, what your purpose was. So you've been writing the book for a while, but, you know, one, what was it like? Because it's a phenomenal success, so that might have been a bit startling for you. And two, do you think that the fact that you have this, you know, fairly robust non-published background kind of gave you perspective on what's important and what's not in the whole publishing world?
I actually gave up on the publishing world and for a while. You know, the funny thing is, I really hadn't been writing for a long time. Before I started writing the book, I never wrote at all. I left school with a grade 8 education, and I just had, and my wife and I got into this thing where we write stories for our Friday night date night before our meal and the wine and stuff, right? And that was so much fun. And of course, I started getting competitive, and the stories got a little more deeper and stuff. And then she sent it away, and I won Penticton Writers Festival. I sat down to write. I didn't have a clue how to write. I sat down to write the great Canadian novel, and I didn't know what to do. So we talked about it, and it was decided that I read nothing but literary award-winning novels. So I did that for 5 years, and I tried all different types of writing. I tried a biography, but my sister-in-law came to visit once, and she happened to pick up one of the pages, and she picked it up and she said, "That didn't happen, that didn't happen, and that didn't happen." So immediately I switched over to fiction because I felt so freer to do that. But
It is freeing, yeah.
it is very freeing, and yeah,
Oh,
it took me I don't know how many years to write the book, but it took a long time to get it published. Probably 5 years to get it published.
that's interesting.
I would say maybe 8-10 years to write the book, but the second book, it's taken me 8 months. There's a huge difference between what I learned and what I didn't know at all.
Oh, I was going to ask you that too, because I wondered, when did you, so I was going to say, I assume you started this second book a while ago, and I've heard this, it's heartbreaking to me because I've heard this story of someone who's really got a great book and they just can't get traction. And, a couple of times I've sort of quietly as I could get out and push and just sort of like, this thing should be published. I don't know why it hasn't been. And, maybe I can put a bug in someone's ear, but it's so easy. My husband was saying last night, there's life gives you all kinds of reasons not to continue, but it really helps having someone who can, help you see the point again and get you
That's
back
right.
to, having faith in it. And it's hard to have faith when ultimately, there's the quiet life of the writer, and then there's the sort of the performance, and they're completely different skills. So yeah.
Well, I was lucky when I was writing that I had my wife. She has an MBA and all that stuff, and she's a big help, and I can bounce ideas off her. I think for a beginning writer, you really need to bounce ideas off somebody. You should find somebody that you can. It doesn't have to be somebody with a degree, but somebody who reads will tell you that doesn't sound right or something. My wife's pretty quick to tell me if something doesn't sound right. So
that's funny. I love that story of you guys telling each other stories on date night. That's extremely lovely.
it was so much fun. It was so much fun.
And
That was all started by CBC Radio.
Was it?
Bill, what's his name? The sad goat, Bill Richardson.
Oh yeah.
I had retired, and we bought a house in Kelowna, and I was going to fix it up and sell it. And I was ripping out the carpets, and the CBC radio was on, and there he was, and he said, "Send me your stories. Please send me your stories. I'll give you a subject." And this one subject was your favorite article of clothing. I just didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And then so my wife and I agreed, why don't we do that? Why don't we write a story all week? Friday night, have a nice dinner and music, and let's read each other a story. So that's what we did. And it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's what it's supposed to be for. I mean, the performance part is wonderful, but you're right, to be able to bounce it off someone you love, or someone,
Yes.
who's participating in it, in the same way. And I've often said, lots of writers have an important reader in their life, and sometimes it's a surprise who that person is. It's not necessarily, the best writer you've ever met. It can sometimes be a surprise who is super useful to keep you thinking clearly about what you're and who can talk to you, who can actually, get through this that's happening when you're handing your stuff over to someone.
That's right. My wife was a really avid reader. She reads all the time. And even 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. So she was easy to talk to about it. She knows how she knew how it should kind of wind up and how it should ramp up and watch your adjectives and adverbs and stuff, and it was pretty good. I was lucky.
So are you able to talk about, I'm relatively superstitious about talking about it, what I'm writing until I totally have traction. And I know the book isn't really going to change in any significant way, but I know lots of writers. Michael Ondaatje is one of these people who will not talk about it
Oh, really?
until it's done. He's and I agree with him. I have the same feeling that if I talk about it before I haven't nailed it down, really, I'll just suck the blood from it. So don't feel you have to tell me what the second novel is about if you're like that, but I'm curious.
Oh, no, I don't mind at all, actually. The book is finished. I do have to plug a couple of holes in it, and then I get to do the editing, and that's where all the magic is. All the beautiful little stories come to you and you round it off. It's actually okay. When the book was my first, All the Quiet Places was finished, I did a lot of Zooms because of COVID. And sometimes I get a very angry reaction from some of the readers. Actually, one reader said to me, "I did not like the way your book ended. It made me mad." So I wrote an alternate ending. I said, "What? Really? Send it to me. Please send it to me." So she sent me the alternate ending, and then she emailed back and said, "Well, what did you think?" I said, "It's a beautiful ending, but it'll never happen to a First Nations boy. It's never wrapped up with a bow like that." But thanks for trying.
Thanks for trying. Well, and this is a person who got very, very involved in your book. It's unpleasant when somebody, I hated that character or, whatever, but
well, the second book actually it's kind of like yours. It's a companion piece to the first book, and it'll answer a lot of the questions that were hurled at me over Zooms and stuff. And so
I'm sorry you had questions hurled at you.
It was just
great
I understood
things
completely.
to talk about.
I understood completely. People fell in love with Eddie, and the ending is not what they expected, but it's not what they expected. And I said, "What do you think of the ending?" He said, "I hated it." I said, "Well, read it again, slowly, really, really slowly, and the answer is right in there."
Yes.
And so that helped a lot.
Okay, so because I don't want to spoil anything, but I really thought that the way you end the book and people, you can't just flip to the end of the book and discover this, because it's all about the journey to get to that final thing. I thought it was exquisite, and it was so beautifully done and left inside. It's literally the right way to end that book, I think. And I was practically blubbering. It was well done. So anyway, I got it, but
coming from you, that's just high praise. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
You're now, my dear, we are at what do we have? At some point we are going to, I didn't get to ask. I asked 10 out of the 90 questions I had. Just very quickly, you said something about the editing process. I love editing, and I love all the stages where you have proofs, and then people are helping you just find those little things that are wrong. And if you got a good copy editor, it's a blessing. And at that point, it may feel like people are criticizing you because they're finding all the errors, but in fact, it's just such a nice, clean feeling to just find those things and make the book as good as it can be, and then wish it well and send it out into the world. What was your experience with that? Did you enjoy your editor? How did that work?
When I wrote the book and I was trying to find publishers, I did all the big five first, thinking you're really special. And then some of them didn't answer back. So I tried all the smaller publications, And one publication, I won't say who it was, said, you know, Brian, this is a beautiful story, but you should hire yourself an editor and help you finish this book properly. It's too good to leave. It's too good to forget about, but it's not good enough to publish. So I thought about it for a while, and I found this most amazing publisher. Sorry, editor. Her name is Susan Mays. One of the reasons why I got her was her father used to write for the Beachcombers. I thought, well, anybody who writes for the Beachcombers, you know. But she
I love
taught
this
me.
show.
She showed me tricks. She did write a lot of. She did edit quite a bit of stuff. I didn't mind at all. I wanted to know. I needed to know, and I did learn, and it
Yeah, no,
helps a
you do.
lot.
You do learn. And I think it was smart of you. I mean, I feel like the people who thought this book is good but not good enough, it's like wrong-o. But you know, it is incredibly good to have somebody go over your work, and especially with a debut, there are so many things I think you were doing intuitively that you may not have
Yeah.
actually known why it was working, but it was working and it was natural to you to tell the story that way. I mean, when I started to read the book, I was like, oh, this is a fellow creature. This is a real writer. And you never know when somebody says, you know, would you like to blurb this book? You just sort of go, please let it be okay.
I love
But it
your
was like
review, by the way.
one chapter, and I was like, he's doing all the right stuff here, and the arc, the trajectory, the kid's trajectory has there's a grace to it. So I think it's well done anyway. And
Well,
your
let me tell
editor,
you
good
something,
for her.
okay? When I read your book, Outlander, I fell in love with that book, and it's a writing, and you could tell you were a poet. You could just tell. And I was going to do this later, but I'll do it now. I keep your book beside me on the computer, as well as The Grapes of Wrath.
Oh,
Those are my two go-to books.
I'm in good
And
company.
I peruse them once in a while and go over. It's so beautiful. And
Oh,
but
it's so fun.
your book was so special to me because I had never read such a beautiful first paragraph in a book ever.
Oh.
That first paragraph is so special. It should be framed almost. It's so good.
You're so kind. Thank you very much for that. I think, and clearly you do as well, that the beginnings of books and endings of books, the words you use are incredibly important. And endings, both of them are very hard. Titling is hard too. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's incredibly important. And we were just talking about a title the other day, Kevin and me, and I won't say it, and I can't remember what it was, but it was like, that's an okay title, but it doesn't
Okay.
say anything.
Right.
You know, yeah, they're all hard. Everything is hard. That's all there is to it.
I tried my first book. It sounds like I've got 25 books. And my book, I had read somewhere that you should try to really make a special statement. You should try to take something from your book as a title. So that's what I did. All the Quiet Places.
Yes.
If you had gone a little bit further when I was going to school, it's when he gets to the school bus stop and he looks up and he sees the bus coming. He gets a sick feeling in the stomach, and he wishes that he remembered all the quiet places down the river and wished that he was at any one of them right now. So
Yeah.
that's where I took that from. So
That's interesting you say that, because I have a little bit of a problem with my title, The Outlander, because there is this, you know, giant thing out there. But Kevin, my husband, when I was going out, you know, I have a working title. It's not appropriate. What should I do? And he said, go through the book and find a word or a phrase that is unusual, but speaks to the book as a whole. And it was perfect for me for the language of the book and the time of the book and the setting and all that stuff. And so I really don't regret it. And we talked about it once I realized there was this other thing, which wasn't quite the monster it is now. And you know, yeah, I think that's a method that works. It really
Yeah.
does. And when it works for the reader too, because when they put the book down on their bedside table, the title is telling them what's in there. So
That's
Brian,
right.
I think I've got I've got some questions here. If
Sure.
you like to, we've got anonymous attendee. How vulnerable do writers need to be? Must a writer share everything to make the story better? Is it okay not to share, either due to trauma or personal preference? Can we still share our truth without revealing all of it, if that makes sense? So this goes back to what I was talking about, the sort of the writers suffering a little bit over the question of the authenticity of it.
That's a good question. That's my advice to a writer, beginning writer, is you have to be vulnerable. I know people who don't want to expose themselves.
Yeah.
Like if a man can't write down, I cried, there's something wrong. You need to let yourself go. It's not as bad as you thought it was. I mean, nobody cares. I mean, if it's a good book, it's a good book. Nobody's going to say you're a sissy or a crybaby, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
as basic as I can get. But you have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. You have to be vulnerable.
I agree. And part of that is being brave. You have to be
Yes.
courageous enough to go to the places that are going to be rough for you. And also, I think because you have a book that's full of darkness and light, you have to be able to give the reader a little trouble too, like for the reader to be feeling uncomfortable about something, even if it's sort of, you know, a
Right.
moral quandary or something like that. I've got a question. Oh, we've got a bunch of questions here. How did you go about getting it published, being a new writer? I think you answered that, but how long did it take overall?
5 years. I tried all these little publications, and I was just gonna quit. See, because it's like I had been in therapy for all those years, and it was so cleansing for me. I didn't really care anymore. But I was going through the independent publishers, and I noticed this one little publisher, and she said she likes First Nation stories. So I went to her, and I said to my wife, we've got to find a little publisher who's looking for a First Nation story, good First Nation story. So I sent it to her, and I didn't hear a word from her. And I was going to, so I got mad, and I said, what's going on? Please answer me. She said, oh, I'm sorry. I want to read it this week. And so the week after that came back, and then she said, I am in awe. And that just meant everything to me. So
Yeah.
I've been surrounded by strong women. The publisher's name was Taryn Boyd. Susan Mays was my editor, and my wife, Marlene. Without those women, I could never have done it. And that's the truth.
I think pretty much all of us could have been made or broken by the kind of support we got from other people. I couldn't. I think I would be a secret writer without my husband, who I met when I was about 26, and I might have continued to have, you know, little ideas. But he was the one who said, "How about you do some work? Like, how about you take yourself seriously?" Kalina has a lovely question here. We probably don't have a ton of time for it, but she says, amazing books, both of you. I was wondering if you could both speak to research process and how you go about writing fiction while also maintaining elements of real places, experiences, and time periods. Do you have any tips for research?
I didn't do a lot of research. I just knew what I knew. Of all the places in the city of Vernon, I knew them all by memory, and all the clothing stores and all the restaurants and cafes. You, on the other hand, did a lot of research. I could tell the place where the prisoners were kept, you know, and
that's sort of where the book started, and I had to do a massive amount of, I had to understand what World War I was like for Western Canada, what was happening at any given time, and the research was incredibly dry, but I had to understand it. But the things that really got me were vintage photographs and photographs from the prisoner of war camp, and you know,
that's right.
it's a very photographed area. So I would have these beautiful photographs up and, you know, pasted up in my office, and yeah. And so there's dry research, there's research that's personal. And then there's almost like the poetic research of images and movies and books and things like that like inspire you. So yeah, those are all absolutely fantastic. So folks, we've got I'm really sorry to the people who asked questions here. We didn't get an answer, but hopefully you know, what Brian and I have been talking about has whetted your appetite for getting his book. Most of you sound like you've already read the book. You know, recommend it to your friends. It's been a pleasure for me to, you know, get to talk to you. I hope one of these days we get to talk in person. I can congratulate you in person. But
you know, this has been a real treat for me to talk to you. Can we do another hour maybe?
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Thank
But
you, Jill.
know, in person, congratulations and a pat on the back for you. Well, that's what's happening right now. And
Thank you, Jill.
thank you to the Giller Book Club for having us here and letting me get to ask these questions. So Daphne's here.
I'd like to say thanks to Daphne too.
Yeah.
My boss.
She's your boss
Well,
now.
not
She
really.
is.
But thank you both for being here tonight. This was so great. You really got to the meat of the book and the meat of the matter. And although we got started late, thank you all for joining us tonight. I agree, could have gone on for another hour and I still would have been glued to this Zoom, but for those of you who did miss it because of some technical difficulties on our end, please know that this has been recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel later in the week. And please join us in about 2 weeks on May 16th to hear last year's jury member, Katie Kitamura, interview, excuse me, Antoine Wilson, author of the fabulous book, Mouth to Mouth, which was longlisted last year. And if you've subscribed to our book club, then you'll get a registration notice. If you haven't, please just visit our website and you can register on the website. Thanks so much and good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.